Greetings, friends. I'm here today with Jacob Joyce, who will be joining us to direct the Spartanburg Philharmonic in this Saturday's program. Now, it's a really interesting program. 3 great, very wildly different American pieces, but all things that are exciting and tuneful and give the audience lots to listen from. Welcome to Spartanburg, Jacob.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about your kind of musical origin story? How did you get into music? What drew you into this as a kid?
I have a very specific and I don't know if it's funny, but quite specific origin story.
Okay.
Which is
we'll go with funny.
Yeah,
this is going to be
hopefully
great.
It's
right.
funny.
I am totally looking forward to this.
My parents, I was the first child, and my parents were, I think they'd admit, were a little helicoptery as raising a first child, and so. But neither of them are musicians, but they showed me the only TV that I was really allowed to watch as a kid was documentary TV. And I had no idea what was going on in any of the documentaries when I was 1-2 years old, but they showed me this documentary called From Mao to Mozart, which is a documentary about Isaac Stern, the violinist, going to China right after the Cultural Revolution. Some reason they showed me this documentary. I wanted to watch it all the time. When I recently went back and watched it as an adult, I realized I didn't retain any of the actual documentary knowledge about anything that they talk about in this documentary. I was just infatuated with the sound of the violin. So when I was 2 years old, I asked my parents to get me violin lessons. And so they signed me up. I started on a cardboard violin before my 3rd birthday. They don't let you actually hold a violin until you've got the posture down a little bit. So
probably wise, yeah.
There you go. But then my first memory as a kid is from Christmas of my 3rd, or when I was 3 years old, getting my first actual violin.
Wow.
So I remember that, and I started playing.
That is quite a story.
Yeah, it's.
And amazing to think,
why?
to think that it all came about because of the limited TV viewing.
Yeah, exactly.
If you've been watching the Game Show Network or something.
Yeah, maybe I would be a host of a game show. Yeah.
Huh. So you started on violin at a really young age, Suzuki, I presume?
Suzuki, exactly. So a lot of stuff by ear.
Right.
We were discussing this last night, actually, how a lot of Suzuki students, I don't know if this is true of myself, but you often don't really actually learn to read music for the first year or two. But I credit a lot of any of the musical ear that I do have, I credit to Suzuki and developing at that young age a kind of ear for music. Yeah.
So you're doing that as a kid, and then I presume orchestra program at school in addition to private lessons after school or on Saturdays or something like that.
Yep. Played in a lot of orchestra growing up.
Now, where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Oh, okay.
So I'm from Michigan. It's a town with a great classical music scene, great music education. So I played in youth orchestra, public school orchestra, and I loved the orchestral repertoire. I mean, I think as a violinist, you're often trained, you play a lot of concertos. All the Suzuki instruction is kind of solo repertoire, but I always loved playing in orchestra, and I always found myself, one thing I think I credit starting early, I was always very quick to memorize things. And so in orchestra, I would often not feel like I needed to look at the music that much, and I would look all around and watch people come in. And I credit that with my initial interest in conducting. I was kind of bored actually by the job of a section violin player, which at times you don't have that much control over what's going on. But I was sitting there and I really was curious to see who was coming in and what stuff sounded like. And so playing in orchestra, there are all these videos, even as a older student when I shouldn't have been doing this, but any orchestra performance video that I'm in, I look like this clueless, zoned out kid because I'm staring all around, not at my music at all. But I just loved looking at everyone who's coming in and making eye contact with all the other players in the orchestra. So lent itself nicely to conducting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're kind of, from that point, is there being a high schooler, are you sort of taking mental notes as to what works on the podium, what doesn't? Well, when I'm doing it, I'm going to do it this way. Were you starting to think of that at that point?
Definitely. I mean, I think the other reason why I am in conducting and how I credit my jump to conducting is that, you know, they say this about being president or something too, that just however someone seems, they actually have to have a massive ego to run for president.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like if you think that you're qualified to make decisions on behalf of so many other people, like that takes a big ego. And in high school, you know, you have all this blind confidence and you're quite naive. And I think I thought to myself, you know, I have all these great ideas. I'm sitting here and I see my high school conductors, anyone who comes through, and I see all these things that they do well, but also all these things. I'm sitting there, I would do that way better than them. You know, I need to, and so I got interested in conducting. The first time you ever step on a podium, you like immediately learn that it's way, way harder than it looks. And it's not so much about you don't come up with these ideas, tell people your ideas and done. You know, it's a completely different skill set. But as a gullible, naive high schooler, I was saying,
there's no doubt that it's one of those jobs that looks easy until you try. Again, probably much like president.
Yeah,
you know, we all sit there watching the president going, "Oh, what an idiot! I can do this." You know?
Yeah,
but in fact, it's actually got to be pretty hard.
It is.
And conducting is totally like that. There's so much input coming at you all the time, and you're constantly having to refine your own impressions of what's going on, right?
We used to talk about this at Aspen, which is a summer festival that I went for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a brutally intense training program for conductors, really hard. You're in front of all your peers, you're getting grilled every day, you have to learn a ton of repertoire. But there's a conductor's orchestra, the ACA orchestra, and students can go to Aspen for free on a scholarship to play in that. So there's a number of professional musicians disseminated across the country who have played in ACA. Mm-hmm. And I always find that they have a much better kind of, they get what it is like to be a conductor because they've played in that lab setting and they've seen this variety of students trying to learn and how hard it is. Mm-hmm. And I think they have a much more, not that people should be easy on conductors. I mean, I think conductors should be held to a super high standard because you're up there, you better be doing a good job. Mm-hmm. But I think they do, you can always tell those players that kind of have a empathy for how tricky of a job it is. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So then, I presume you entered college probably not as a conducting major, right?
No.
Because very few places offer that as an undergrad. So did you enter as a violin major and then switch during or switch after? What was
I actually went to academic undergrad. Okay. I kept playing violin. I knew that I had a decision whether I wanted to go to music school or academic undergrad, and I felt like I was always a very efficient practicer, and I didn't feel like I usually practiced about an hour and a half a day in high school, and a lot of my colleagues, people who I was going to summer festivals with, were practicing 4 hours a day.
Yeah, and fiddle players will do that.
They really will.
High achievers will spend their time.
But I felt like I was able to hang with the level, practicing an hour and a half a day, and I also didn't really have the attention or drive to do more than that. I think it's partly because when I practiced, I really wanted to get things done and try to be efficient. But so I felt like I wasn't going to lose tons of ground going to an academic college, and I also just wanted to keep my horizons open. So I majored in music, but that was a history theory. Yeah. And I actually, feels weird now, but I did a double major in econ, which I've forgotten all and haven't used a lick of since. But in another life, I was that was to appease my parents in case the professional musician route didn't totally work out. But then I was already thinking about conducting. And actually one of the reasons I went where I went was because they had a number of student-run orchestras.
Which was where, by the way?
I went to Yale for undergrad,
Uh-huh.
and I did it. So I was in this 5-year program. I did a master's on violin, but I was already thinking about conducting, and I led my own orchestra there. So that was that's where I really learned when you run your own orchestra and you're responsible for setting everything up, managing the budget, marketing the concerts, you learn to be appreciative of how great my life is now as a professional conductor, where I just get to do.
Because you've got a professional staff to actually do that stuff for you.
Exactly, yeah. But I also think, it gave me an appreciation for, I now work at the Pittsburgh Symphony, which has a staff of 80 people probably or something, and there's someone in a job.
Just like the Spartanburg Philharmonic, 80 people.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that, when you've done it all yourself, you realize how much work goes into it, how challenging it is. Sorry, how many things have to get taken care of, how hard it is. And so when it's a small staffed organization, and I developed the appreciation for that I think the understanding of what goes into making it work. And I like to think that it's made me a more pragmatic musical leader in that way, because when there was a time when no one was there to take care of anything for you, then you learn how to keep your head on straight. And,
Yeah, and that's, one of the things I'm sure that goes with that is efficiency of programming, because as a programmer, you're looking at things and going, okay, I'm going to need 2 trombones for this piece.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm not going to pick the piece that requires me to have 4 trombones, because, just inefficient from a rehearsal and paycheck writing standpoint.
Yeah.
So as you think about this program, which has these 3 really interesting and very different American pieces, what were some of the things that made you bring these 3 pieces together?
Well, this program, I was thinking about, I'm an American conductor, and I love doing American music, and I was thinking about an American themed program. And the Ives Second Symphony is one of my favorite pieces. To me, it's the quintessential piece of American music. And so I wanted to do it for that reason, just because I love it. And every time I've gotten a chance to do it, it's really a thrill. But I was thinking about what to put around it. And kind of the concept of the entire program became this idea of, Ives was really cutting edge when he wrote this symphony, when he wrote a lot of his works. This symphony's date, pre-1900, when he started, is kind of fascinating to me in how much of a modernist language it has in certain aspects. But he really created this landscape of American music, which gave it this identity of incorporating American folk tunes, American hymn tunes, much like I saw that Spartanburg Phil next season is doing Dvorak 9.
Right.
Dvorak did that for Czech music just before Ives, and so many of these non-German, Austrian, French, non-Western European musical cultures decided to incorporate their own folk music into classical music to make it their own. And so Ives was really the first American to do that. And this piece is the kind of, for me, the culmination of that. It's a huge jambalaya of American folk tunes, hymn tunes. And so then the Gershwin piano concerto that we're doing is really, I thought it was interesting because it's a classical piano concerto in form, but with tons of jazz influence. And so he was really clued into the popular music of the day in a lot of his writing. And it is just like the Ives is a European symphony with this Americanness slapped right on it. The Gershwin is similarly a kind of European piano concerto with jazz slapped right on it. And then the Jesse Montgomery piece that we're doing from just a few years ago called Coincident Dances is so Ivesian to me. That's why I wanted to include it, because the whole idea of Ives kind of is you're standing in a town square getting hit with 5 different folk tunes, hymn tunes. There's a band over here, there's a church over here at the same time.
Yeah.
And
so it's practically simultaneous, isn't it?
It is
all of these different tunes coming at you.
Exactly. And the Montgomery is very similar. It's meant to evoke sitting in a windowsill in Harlem, listening to 4 different musical sounds, traditions coming at you at the same time. So it's incredibly Ivesian, and that there's this one passage in the Montgomery I'm concerned about for tonight's rehearsal because it's insanely hard, and it is very Ivesian because it's incredibly complex. There are a million things going on at once, and it's this like pastiche chaos of 3 different musical styles at once. Yeah.
Now, a piece like the Ives is, I'm sure, is something that you work on as a student, because it's, it's something that is, especially at Yale, as Ives being a fellow Yale, that you're kind of looking at this score, and there's a lot to study, and there's a lot to think about. What are the logistics of bringing out this moment when Columbia Gem of the Ocean pops up in the trumpet, and we've got this hymn tune going on in the oboe at the same time? How do I show this with my hands, right? So you probably have a certain amount of experience. If not experience, you've had some time to think about it.
Yeah.
As you're approaching a piece like the Montgomery, which simply hasn't been around long enough for you to have a decade and a half of study on it.
Yeah.
How do you approach that kind of piece, learning it essentially from scratch?
Learning pieces from scratch. I mean, the thing is, I credit my conducting teacher a lot with teaching me and all of us who study with him, I think, a good system for learning scores, which I feel like I've made my own, but it's the same system that I'd apply to Beethoven's Fifth. Learning, I had to learn that at one point for the first time, as I do to this Montgomery or any other piece. And what I really try to do is just take a piece and look through. It's a very simple and foolproof technique, actually, for me, but I take a piece and I look through it and I play the scenario in my head. If I had 5 minutes, if someone gave me this piece and said, you have to conduct it in 5 minutes, I go through and think about what would I really need to know in 5 minutes to be able to conduct this piece, and do that. So, for the conductor, that's big tempo changes, meter changes, a few things. And then I go back and think, okay, now let's say I was given another 15 minutes. What's the next level that I really need to understand and know? And I work my way up so that that is not meant to dictate how long I spend on a piece. I spend however much time on a piece I feel like I need to really feel like I know it. But that ensures that I am being efficient and that I don't miss something. The thing that actually really taught me that was at Aspen. You're under a lot of pressure. You have to learn repertoire very quickly. And my teacher was the guest teacher at Aspen that week, and I was doing a movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, which I've heard a million times. I've known since I was a little kid, and so I was like, okay, that's gonna be fine. I know how to conduct that. It's not gonna be a problem. And my teacher asked me, I finished the movement, and he asked me not to flip back to the first page, and he, in front of the whole orchestra, he was like, what's the tempo of this movement? And I realized that I had never bothered to look once. I've known this piece, and that's the first thing you look at as a conductor. I mean, can't not know the tempo. And I had no idea, and I was super embarrassed. But now that's my technique is you don't miss things that way because you get what's most pertinent, and so that's exactly what I did when I sat down with the Montgomery, just like anything else. Yeah, you know.
So it's a matter of prioritization.
Yeah.
You know, not so much that. So folks at home, don't feel like you can go and learn a score in 20 minutes. That's not what he's saying here. He's saying it's a matter of, you have a sort of like kind of inverted pyramid, I would expect of.
For sure.
I guess if it's inverted, it would go this way.
Yeah.
An inverted pyramid of these are the things that are essential, then there's this, then there's that.
Yeah.
And then I can work my way from level to level depending on how much time I have.
Yeah. No, I do that. I mean, not to say that it should take 20 minutes. One thing I do in my job at Pittsburgh Symphony is we have a lot of these films and concert performances. So Star Wars or Jurassic Park, live with the film. And for that, you're on a click track and you have to synchronize. It's incredibly hard. You have to learn the score incredibly well. I still do the exact same technique, but those take me hundreds of hours to prepare. But I still go through with, you know, what do I need to know in 20 minutes? But to feel like I know those, it's hundreds of hours of preparation.
Yeah.
But this way I ensure I'm not missing anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same sort of prioritization is surely required in rehearsal, right? So
100%.
as you think about, for instance, this passage in the Montgomery that you've talked about with, you know, it's surely something that nobody in the orchestra has played before.
Yeah.
And you've got 3 different types of music going on at once. So how do you plan out how you're going to rehearse, knowing that you've got a limited amount of time with the orchestra, a passage like that?
I actually think that my attitude is exactly the same in rehearsal. I have this kind of concept of there's a hierarchy of needs that you need to address. And to me, that ensures that you're always optimizing, being efficient with the musician's time, and that you're not saying something disingenuous. Because if I went into a passage like that tonight and it's kind of chaotic and we don't even have all the notes completely right, let alone the rhythms completely right, which would be legitimate in such a tricky passage, even for a professional orchestra. It's a very tricky spot. If you start talking about nuances of phrasing in a passage like that or something like that, you know, it needs to be put together. And what's going to make the most difference to the product of the performance is not these nuances of phrasing. It's we got to get all the right notes in the right place. And so I think about that. It's a great way to approach rehearsal in my mind, because then it applies to any scenario you're in. If you're conducting the Berlin Philharmonic, you know, if there are wrong notes in that rehearsal, you better be addressing them. There almost certainly won't be. They're going to play all the right rhythms. They're going to play, but you have this hierarchy so that maybe with a really stellar orchestra that's on it, and you start at a very high level and you keep working up. But, you know, I conduct the youth orchestra in Pittsburgh, and similarly there, it's about how can I take this from where it starts, wherever it starts, to as high a level as I can in the time allotted. And so that'll be the same tonight. You know, one thing that's interesting about going to an orchestra for the first time is that you never know. Like you never know what the strengths are going to be, what the weaknesses are going to be, how it's going to sound, how they're going to play, what familiarity they might have with the specific language of Ives or anything else. But what makes me feel more kind of in control of that process is just going in with this sense of, what am I going to address first? Well, it depends on what's going to make the biggest difference to the outcome. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And it's an exciting program because you've got 3 different pieces, really, which there's none of that you can entirely take for granted, is there? It's all stuff that's tricky. It's all stuff that is going to require everybody being on the edges of their chair and being really committed.
Yeah, you say exciting, I say nerve-wracking, but I mean, but same. I mean, it's
you didn't get into the business to be safe.
No, not at all. And I actually I tend to be I've been told that I tend to be on the faster paced side of rehearsal, and I like to do things quickly, and because I see my job as getting it as far along as I can in the time allotted.
Sure.
which I think will serve me well in a program like this, because like you said, there's not a moment off. So we'll have to be on it in rehearsal and try to, but I agree. It's exciting because that's, for me, that's the job. And that's what I love about it is it's actually a thrilling sensation. I always find, I mean, I get this, on a really dramatic scope with the youth orchestra, where we'll start a program and I'll be beside myself because I'm like, there's no way that we can even play this in 10 weeks from now. You know, we have 10, but this is such a disaster. And to see it go from there to a product that we feel really good about putting out there is really thrilling. And you get that on a much more condensed schedule with professional orchestras.
You've got 3 days.
Yeah. But even so, I mean, that seeing that is a thrilling sensation. So I love it. Yeah.
And it's going to be a thrilling experience for listeners as well.
Yeah.
So
I think it'll be a fun, I've been mentioning to people, hopefully some people tune into this, but I'll say something during the concert as well, because I think the Ives will benefit from a little context and guidance, because I think it's a piece that if people feel safe listening to, and that they're not missing all of the complexity, but really at times it's supposed to sound crazy and ruckus, and then they'll really enjoy it, because it is a masterpiece of Americana. And almost everyone, if they were raised in a church tradition or a folk music tradition or a bluegrass tradition or a fiddle music, they'll recognize a lot of stuff in the piece.
If you just had a third grade music teacher who made you sing songs as part of your class, you're going to encounter them in this piece. Yeah. All right, so it promises to be a very exciting evening. Saturday, the 22nd of April, 7 o'clock, Twitchell Auditorium. See you there, folks.